All right, let's get right into it. You hear it all the time, right? That the American middle class is in trouble, that it's been completely hollowed out. But what if that whole story isn't really about some big, sudden crash or a crisis that just happened? What if it's about something that unfolded much more quietly over decades? See, when you ask that question, most of us, our minds immediately jump to things that happened pretty recently. But the real story, the one that fundamentally reshaped the entire American economy, well, it starts a lot earlier than you probably think. So, you have the usual suspects, the stuff you always hear about, the 2008 financial crisis, or maybe the inflation we're all dealing with right now. But the source material we're looking at points to a totally different timeline. It makes the case that the real cracks in the foundation appeared way back between the 1970s and the 1990s. And it wasn't one single event. It was this quiet, slow, structural shift. So let's unpack that. It all really starts with this idea that economists call the Great Decoupling. Now, to understand what decoupled, what broke apart, we first have to see how things used to be connected. For a long, long time, through most of the post-war era, there was this kind of unwritten promise in the American economy. As companies got better, faster, more efficient, as they became more productive, their workers got a piece of the action. Your paycheck went up. Productivity and wages, they rose together, almost in lockstep. You could say it was the very engine that built the middle class. But then, that engine just broke. Right around the late 1970s, that link was severed. You can see it right here. Productivity, that's how much value is being created, it just kept soaring, climbing higher and higher. But the pay for the average worker, it went almost completely flat. The two lines that used to travel together suddenly went their separate ways. And that, right there, that brings us to the central question of this whole thing. I mean, if companies were creating all this new wealth, if they were more productive than ever, but that money wasn't going to the workers, where did it go? Well, the answer, at least according to our source, is in a huge change in how the people at the very, very top were getting paid. And this is where the story gets pretty wild. By the time we get to the 1990s, the pay for a CEO at a major American company had absolutely exploded. We're talking about 400 times what their average employee was making. 400 times. I mean, this wasn't just a little raise. This was a complete rewriting of how the money inside a company was divvied up. And the tool, the mechanism that lit the fuse on this explosion was the stock option. It's actually a pretty simple idea. You give an executive the right to buy company stock in the future, but at today's price. So if they can do anything to make that stock price shoot up, they get to cash in, become incredibly personally wealthy. You see what happened? This created a brand new, incredibly powerful incentive. All of a sudden, the number one job for an executive wasn't necessarily to invest for the long term or to think about their workforce. The clearest, fastest path to a personal fortune was to make that stock price jump, and jump fast. And what's the easiest way to do that? Keep wages down, cut costs. The company's success was no longer a shared pie. It was being funneled to the top. Now, this massive shift in executive pay didn't just happen in a bubble. It was happening at the same time as all these other powerful economic forces were pushing in the exact same direction, basically tilting the entire scale. Think about it. In the 70s, the power of labor unions to bargain for higher wages started to fade. Then in the 80s, globalization kicked into high gear, sending lots of manufacturing jobs overseas. And by the 90s, the economy itself was changing, becoming what they call financialized, which just means it became more about making money from money through the stock market instead of making actual things. Every single one of these trends put the average worker in a weaker position. So the very nature of work was being transformed. The old foundation, stable, good-paying factory jobs with a strong union, that was being replaced by a whole new reality, a world of lower-wage service jobs where you had less power as an individual and where that whole ladder of middle-skill careers just disappeared, leaving a huge gap. It was like the ladder to the middle class was being pulled up right behind you. So this created a really tough two-sided problem. On one side, you've got wages that just aren't going anywhere. And on the other, the actual cost of living a middle-class life started to spiral completely out of control. So, while paychecks were basically flatlining for most folks, the price tags on the absolute pillars of a middle-class life, we're talking a college degree, decent healthcare, a place to live, all of them were just exploding. And these aren't luxuries, right? These are the fundamentals. You can almost picture what was happening to family budgets all over the country. The slice of the pie for these essential costs just kept getting bigger and bigger, but the pie itself wasn't growing, so it just ate into everything else. That financial breathing room, the very thing that kind of defines the middle class, it was just vanishing. And really, this is the bottom line. It's the simple, painful math that explains the whole problem. For more and more people, the goalposts for what it takes to have a middle-class life were moving way faster than they could possibly run. So, when you put all of these pieces together, the decoupling of wages from productivity, the explosion in CEO pay, the weakening of worker power, a really clear picture starts to emerge. The central argument, the big idea from our source material is this. The dismantling of the American middle class wasn't some natural outcome. It wasn't an unfortunate accident. It was the direct result of a series of deliberate choices that redirected the incredible wealth this economy was creating away from the many and towards the few. You can almost boil the whole process down to a 3-step playbook. Step 1, change the incentives for the people at the top with stock options. Step 2, take away the power of workers to demand their fair share by weakening unions. And Step 3, just watch as the wealth naturally flows upwards and concentrates with executives and shareholders. It was a system designed to produce a predictable outcome. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When you look at this whole story playing out over decades, do you see the inevitable, efficient, natural workings of the free market? Or do you see something else entirely? And that brings us to the final and really powerful takeaway from this whole analysis. The idea that the struggles of the American middle class weren't just bad luck, that it was the result of a system that was re-engineered, a structure that was, as the source puts it, designed to be broken.